Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic is releasing on June 13th of this year, and with it, the first formal introduction of the Mimic into the games. On a personal level, I've been immersed in the Mimic story ever since the Mimic was introduced in the Tales from the Pizzaplex books almost 2 years ago at this point. Leading up to Secret of the Mimic's release date, I've made it my personal goal on this channel to try to solve the Mimic before Secret of the Mimic likely gives us a lot of answers regarding his origin and story. So, if you want to learn more about the Mimic and Secret of the Mimic, follow me as I begin my theory series into every aspect of the Mimic. If you recall my first video from before the Secret of the Mimic trailer, I touched on the Mimic and puppet connections present within the games already. However, you may also remember that I didn't give any good ideas for why these existed, instead just pointing them out. For some examples of some of these connections within the games, we have the Nightmare-owned staff bots and plushies littered throughout Security Breach and Help Wanted 2. We also have Jackie's box playing a recreation of my grandfather's clock all the way back in the 1970s, as well as the striped power lines, which, while a weaker connection, does bear a similar resemblance to the puppet's arms and tentacles from Nightmare-owned. However, now, with more thought put into this discussion, I think I have come up with 3 possible solutions that could give us the answer to this puppet mystery. Number 1, similar deaths. In the Mimic short story, David, Edwin's son, died by running out of Edwin's workplace when he wasn't awake or present to stop David. Or, in other words, when David left Edwin's place of work. Now, theoretically, Henry could have heard about what happened to Edwin's kid back in the day, as Fazbear Entertainment was very interested in collecting Edwin's property that may or may not have been Fazbear Entertainment's actual legal property. As a result of this, Henry might have wanted to take measures to prevent his own child, Charlie, from dying in a similar fashion to that of David. This could therefore lead to the creation of the puppet, an animatronic designed to specifically keep Charlie from leaving the building, aka Henry's place of work. This connection of David and Charlie both dying in similar fashions is a very interesting connection between Charlie and the puppet. While the puppet and Charlie became one after Charlie died, staying together, the Mimic was separated from David, even trying to copy his mannerisms after death, and now no longer can fulfill his original purpose, that being a friend of David's. This could therefore paint the Mimic as some sort of dark reflection as what happened to Charlie and the puppet, just like Nightmare-owned, which could explain why, even more so than the puppet, the Nightmare-owned is connected specifically to the Mimic in the modern era. While there isn't much evidence for this, I think it is very interesting how similar and connected their deaths are. Number 2, the Fazbear virtual experience. In Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach's free DLC Ruin, you can collect an AR Nightmare-owned plush. Now that by itself isn't too interesting, as there are many collectibles throughout the game. However, its description reads, it's from that old headset game. Now, the only headset game that we know for sure exists within the FNAF universe is Help Wanted 1, or the game from Help Wanted 1 to be more specific, the Fazbear virtual experience. This got me thinking about how a lot of the puppet connections to the Mimic are more focused on specifically Nightmare-owned than the puppet itself, with the one exception being the use of my grandfather's clock in a lot of relations to the Mimic. So, that got me thinking, what games has Nightmare-owned appeared in? Well, to start, his first debut appearance in the series was in the FNAF 4 Halloween update. So, what can we learn about Nightmare-owned from this? Unfortunately, not a lot, since Scott Cawthon himself said that he's not canon within that game. The next game that Nightmare-owned is seen appearing in is in UCN, where he somewhat takes on a star appearance within the game itself. Now, depending on what theories you believe, Ultimate Custom Night is either a dream or coma that William Afton is in, or purgatory afterwards that Golden Freddy is keeping William Afton in. This means that Nightmare-owned still technically isn't a real character that the public or Fazbear Entertainment ever endorsed or saw. That leaves the only game that Nightmare-owned has been in up until Security Breach to be Help Wanted 1. This means that Nightmare-owned's only appearance to the public or as a true character within the Fazbear brand is as a made-up character in a VR experience. Nightmare-owned was never a real character in the FNAF games, only made up by Fazbear Entertainment as a part of their cover-up for the whole series. So, what does this all mean? If Nightmare-owned only existed in a made-up VR game that Fazbear Entertainment created, What does that actually mean about what Nightmarion represents in the modern era? Well, personally, based on this evidence, I think that means that Nightmarion as a character is symbolic of the Mimic's view of the FNAF story, and how the Mimic's view is flawed and is made up of Fazbear Entertainment's propaganda or additions that they made within the VR game. If we go with the assumption that Afton has no external presence on the Mimic and isn't related, or at least that his memories aren't related, then the only experience or true knowledge that the Mimic has of Fazbear Entertainment's story is from the VR game. So by showing how the Mimic is latching on to this character that didn't actually exist, that being Nightmarion, it's showing how the Mimic is flawed in its understanding of the FNAF story. The Mimic is still trying to copy and repeat FNAF's history, or at least Glitchtrap seems to be, but Glitchtrap doesn't have the true story or unfolding of events. It only knows what it knows from the VR game, including made-up characters like Nightmarion. This tells us that we shouldn't trust everything that we're seeing in the new era, as any of it could just be stuff made up by Fazbear Entertainment within their VR experience in-universe. Now on to number 3, which is my personal favorite and the last option that I came up with recently. Number 3, Nightmarion and Afton. Yes, I know we're back with Nightmarion. Instead of looking at Nightmarion from the in-universe FNAF perspective, let's look at what Nightmarion represents in FNAF 4 in general, even if he's not canon. Nightmarion in the FNAF 4 Halloween update replaced Nightmare, and therefore myself and many other theorists have considered them to be representative of the same character or idea within the FNAF universe. So what does Nightmare, and by extension Nightmarion, represent? In Ultimate Custom Night, Nightmare has a death line where he says to William Afton, the theorized protagonist of that game, "I am the wickedness made of flesh." Another interesting connection to know is that Nightmare in the files of FNAF 4 is referred to as Shadow Freddy, almost as if they're the same entity represented in different ways. If this figure, Nightmare, is the same as Shadow Freddy and is William's wickedness given form, then I believe that Nightmare, and therefore Nightmarion, are an entity created by the agony of William's murders or experiments. This explains why Shadow Freddy appears in FNAF 2, where William can be clearly seen in the Save Them minigame. In 3, where Shadow Freddy appears to be helping to lure the MCI victims within the animatronics back to the back room, and in FNAF 4, where there are gas experiments that William set up to monitor the children, and therefore Shadow Freddy takes on the appearance of Nightmare. So how does this connect all back to Nightmarion and his representation in the Steel Wool era? Well, what if all the signs of Nightmarion represent the same thing for the Mimic as it did for William? Depending on how literally you interpret that statement, this means that the Nightmare references could represent one of two things. Either Nightmarion represents the agony from all of the Mimic's actions, just like Nightmare did for William, which you could then use the Nightmarion staff bots as examples of this, as there was the all-staff meeting, likely planned by the Mimic, as well as all the murders that happen in the short stories, from the construction workers and from the teens in the basement. Or Nightmarion could represent the agony within the Mimic itself, this agony causing for the Mimic to lash out more violently. This could even connect back to Afton directly, as this could be Afton's agony latching onto the Mimic, since Nightmare, and therefore Nightmarion, seems to represent specifically Afton's created agony within the original series. All 3 of these original ideas have their own hiccups. Option 1, Similar Deaths, has little evidence and is more of a loose connection, but still something to look into. While number 2 and 3 don't address my grandfather's clock, or the normal puppet connections that the Mimic has. Although I will say as a side, that my grandfather's clock does seem to connect more to specifically Jackie the animatronic, not the Mimic so far, and that the song might just be saying that Jackie has somehow inspired the Mimic, or vice versa, within the game's timeline. If I had to put my money on one of these answers, I would say that the Nightmarion agony explanation fits the best in my head, but I feel that any of these could be likely and could be expanded upon in the Secret of the Mimic game. As I've been analyzing all the material regarding the Mimic within Steel Wool's era, I have also been looking forward into what comes out after Secret of the Mimic and the potential story elements that may be touched on in future games. This put me on a train of thought that led me to a very important question for the future of FNAF, and our handful of protagonists that we've been following since Help Wanted. How do you kill the Mimic? I actually think I found a pretty good answer for this question, and there may already be an example of this working in the games. But before that, let's go to the Bobby Dots conclusion, another short story from the Tales from the Pizzaplex set. In that short story, the main antagonist is 3 digital AI personas called Bobby Dots, who control the entire apartment that they exist on and then turn evil and attack the protagonist. When I read that out loud, I hope that you can see the clear connections to the Mimic, an AI who at one point controlled the entire Pizzaplex, could take on any persona, and has many examples of having malintent within the current story. So how were the Gen 2 Bobby Dots defeated in their story? Since these Gen 2s were experimental and were isolated to this one apartment, all Abe and Sasha, the main characters of the story, had to do was stun them temporarily with a manual update and then shut off all power to the apartment, wiping out the malicious code. Keep that in mind for now, we're going to come back to that. Now let's look at another Tales from the Pizzaplex story, B72. In B72, there is a dark or evil half of Billy who wants to rejoin Billy and regain control of the body, just like Vanessa with Vanny. 2 sides of the same person. Vanny is a branch or part of Glitchtrap, which himself seems to be a branch or section of the Mimic 1 code. So how was B7, the stand-in for Vanny in the story, destroyed? Well, first he was isolated to a single body or entity, that being Billy's grandmother. And then it attached itself to her, so therefore it couldn't leave and was trapped. And then Billy's grandmother died, killing B7 with it. To me, both of these theories show a pretty interesting pattern. Number 1, the threat has to be isolated to one area. It cannot move hosts or jump to a different place. In the case of the Bobby Dots, they were isolated to one apartment. It was experimental. They weren't in control of the entire apartment complex. And with B7, he was isolated to just Billy's grandmother. He even tried leaving during the process because he realized what was going to happen, but Billy's grandmother didn't let him escape. Number 2, the threat is temporarily disabled. Once again, during B7 too, B7 is unable to leave the body. It is stuck in the attaching process. As I stated earlier when recounting the story, the Gen 2s were temporarily disabled by a system update, unable to do anything and were stunned in place. And then finally, number 3, the host of the threat, whether that be the grandmother or the apartment, is quote-unquote killed, if only temporarily in the case of the apartment, flushing out the threat from the body. And yes, I know cutting the power to an apartment isn't quite the same thing as killing a host, but I do think it is the closest parallel that you can draw to killing a host that you can for an apartment. So these are the steps that I've laid out for this theory, and I think that the protagonists, whoever we play as, are gonna have to follow these steps to finally kill the Mimic in the Steel Wool era. But what if I told you something like this has already kinda happened in the games? Let me introduce you to the story of Help Wanted 2. It's generally agreed upon that in this game we play as Cassie's dad, who is being manipulated by the Mimic or Glitchtrap to keep him alive after a security breach, where Princess Quest 3 seems to have flushed him out of the Pizzaplex systems. This can be seen by Glitchtrap suddenly losing control of the staff bots, and Vanny returning to her normal persona of Vanessa. However, there seems to be another force at play influencing Cassie's dad throughout the game, that being Vanny. Personally, I think that Vanny, when we see her at the end of the Princess Quest 4 ending, is just a digital avatar for Vanessa, since that's what the mask, where Cassie's dad is, would likely recognize her as. The mask is plugged into all of the Glitchtrap and Mimic 1 code, so when it registers Vanessa as a previous user of the mask, it sees her as Vanessa, not Vanny. Now, going back to this Princess Quest 4 ending, at the very end of this ending, Vanny appears to squish or kill Glitchtrap. So, I thought that this would be a perfect example to test this criteria. Does Glitchtrap's death match the criteria I laid out? Let's check it. Number 1, was Glitchtrap isolated at the time of his death? I think yes. After Princess Quest 3, I think it's very clear that Glitchtrap is cleared from at least the staff bot system, and by proxy, likely the entire or main Pizzaplex systems. So, by Help Wanted 2, Glitchtrap is likely to only live on through whatever main Vanny system or mask that we see in that game. Otherwise, why is Glitchtrap focused on Cassie's dad as a means to get out, and not using the Pizzaplex systems to take control of the animatronics? Number 2. Was Glitchtrap temporarily disabled or unable to do anything during his death? I also think that this applies as well. First of all, to get the Princess Quest 4 ending at all, you need to get the memory dolls that are given to you by Glitchtrap's hand. Nobody else's, no external force, specifically by Glitchtrap's hand. So, it is likely that his guard would be down going into this ending, since he likely wouldn't be setting up a trap for himself. Also in the ending, he is shown as a plush when you hand him off to Moon. Is this meant to convey to us that maybe he's in a more vulnerable form at this time? That is definitely a more stretchy explanation for sure, but still something that's very possible. And number 3, is the host that Glitchtrap is in killed? I would also say yes, although you have to do a little more digging to understand this one. This whole game seems to be Glitchtrap's attempt to recoup from what happened at the end of Security Breach and start his schemes again, whatever that plan may be. I think Glitchtrap realized that he needed to use someone to help him, just like he needed Vanessa and GGY before. As a result of this, I think he turned to Helpy, just like the little boy from the Candy Cadet story, to help lure Cassie's dad, who may or may not be Jeremy from Help Wanted 1, down to the sinkhole where the Vanny mask is and where Glitchtrap is. Then I think Glitchtrap tries to make Cassie's dad his new host so he can escape the sinkhole, giving him little trinkets such as the Fazforce toys, which would be an enticing trap for Cassie's dad since he has been previously characterized as collecting Freddy's memorabilia. However, just as Glitchtrap was trying to enter his mind, I think that Cassie's dad or Jeremy is killed by the staff bots, who, let me remind you, are no longer under Glitchtrap's control after the end of Security Breach and the Princess Quest 3 ending. This means that these staff bots are not under his control and are now likely under somebody else's control, potentially Vanessa or Mixes, who we know is a security system that is active at some point after Security Breach. This means that both endings of Help Wanted 2 would be happening at the same time, as when Cassie's dad is killed in the first ending, Glitchtrap is simultaneously killed by Vanny, aka Vanessa, in the Princess Quest 4 ending. Whether or not Cassie's dad lives on as Maskbot, I think that Glitchtrap's death in Help Wanted 2 lines up with the criteria that I found to kill an AI within the Freddy's series. Is this a bit of a stretch in some places? Yes, but are there any examples that contradict this logic yet? I don't think so. And for the time being, this is how I feel the Mimic will be inevitably killed off in a future Steel Wool game. Are we going to see an example of this happening in Secret of the Mimic? I don't think so, since the Mimic has clearly lived on to at least Ruin, and he's probably just going to be trapped or deactivated until Fazbear Entertainment uses the Mimic 1 code to expedite the process at the start of Help Wanted 1's story. If you enjoyed the theories, please leave a like and subscribe to not miss any more future uploads. Currently, I have 2 future video ideas that are already in the works and will be released way sooner than this one was. And actually, as a fun surprise today, I have also released a short video game during the same time as the release of this video, and it actually relates to Secret of the Mimic. This game is called Special Delivery. If you want to go check that out, the link is in the description to the download page, and I may be releasing a short video showing off the game soon too. With all that said, this is going to be Mini Byte Games heading out. See you guys next time!